Tonight, U.S. troops on the border ahead of an expected surge of migrants as pandemic-era immigration restrictions come to an end.
I don't have enough agents, I don't have enough infrastructure, I don't have enough technology.
And
journalism is not a crime.
On World Press Freedom Day, a spotlight on American journalists detained abroad. Plus, U.S. fentanyl-related deaths more than triple.
It's really just in everything, in the drug market. It's kind of a scary time.
All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A humanitarian crisis brewing on the border, and another mass shooting shuts down Midtown Atlanta. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup.
And good evening in Washington. I'm Jenna Browder. We begin in Atlanta, where at least one person is dead and 4 victims hospitalized following a mass shooting. All of the victims were women. Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock took to the Senate floor while the suspect was still at large to deliver an impassioned speech calling for action against gun violence.
The unspoken assumption is that this can't happen to me. This won't happen to me. It won't happen to people that I love. But with a mass shooting every day, the truth is the chances are great.
Police identify the suspect in Atlanta as 24-year-old Dion Patterson. New video shows authorities responding to the active shooter situation at a building in Atlanta's Midtown neighborhood, which sparked a temporary lockdown order. The White House saying the president is monitoring the incident and again called for an assault weapons ban and gun law reforms.
Look, is the president frustrated about what we're seeing in our communities, in our schools, in our churches, and this epidemic that we've seen, this gun violence epidemic? And this is yes, of course he's frustrated. Congress needs to take more steps to deal with the violence that we're seeing.
The Atlanta shooting comes one day after the Texas suspect who allegedly shot 5 of his neighbors, including a 9-year-old, was finally arrested after 5 days on the run.
In our other top story tonight, the Biden administration is sending 1,500 troops to the southern border to prepare for a potential wave of migrants, a decision based on the waning days of Trump-era immigration restrictions.
Title 42 is set to expire May 11th, next Thursday. It allows Border Patrol to expel asylum seekers over COVID concerns. And without it, there are fears the border crisis will get worse.
Now, many Republicans have spoken out against ending the restrictions, questioning whether the president's move will work.
And today on Capitol Hill, GOP senators called on the president to reverse course and keep Title 42 in place.
This is a symbolic move that has zero meaning when it comes to changing the status quo. And we're here to say, if you think things are bad now, they're going to get worse come May the 11th. What is now a flood is going to turn into a tsunami.
For their part, many Democrats call the plan to dispatch troops to the Border Patrol, quote, unacceptable. CBN's Mark Martin has more.
So far in 2023, the Border Patrol has already seen a huge uptick in migrant encounters over last year, a 134% increase. Now with Title 42 about to expire, they expect it will get worse, and the administration is calling in reinforcements.
In light of the changes on May 11th and the anticipated surge, DHS did reach out and request this support.
As soon as next week, the Pentagon says the first of the 1,500 active duty troops could arrive at the U.S.-Mexico border. Border Patrol agents say help is desperately needed to process the anticipated migrant surge, which could top 10,000 per day.
I don't have enough agents, I don't have enough infrastructure, I don't have enough technology. I have other areas where I think our agents have really locked down the border security situation.
To allow border agents to directly deal with migrants, the White House says the troops will be at the border for 90 days and only in a support role.
These personnel will be performing administrative tasks like data entry and warehouse support. They will not be performing law enforcement functions.
Republicans have put the blame on President Joe Biden for relaxing restrictions at the border and escalating the crisis. Texas Governor Greg Abbott tweeted, "This does nothing to stop illegal immigration. I deployed up to 10,000 Texas National Guard to the border to fill the gaps created by Biden's reckless open border policies." But the White House says it's up to Congress to produce meaningful immigration reform.
The president understands that we need a system, an immigration system that needs to meet the moment, that's modernized. And one of the things that he's been very clear about, he wants to do this in a humane way and do it differently than it was done in the last administration.
Arizona's Senator Kirsten Sinema, an independent from a border state, weighed in on the border crisis on Fox News.
There are a lot of bipartisan plans that we've been working on with some of our colleagues in the Senate and the House that could actually make a difference. It would be most helpful if the administration would start by actually enforcing the laws that are on the books.
Meanwhile, U.S. and Mexican leaders have agreed on new immigration policies designed to prevent illegal border crossings. Under the agreement, Mexico will continue to accept migrants from Venezuela, Haiti, Cuba, and Nicaragua who are not allowed to enter the U.S. Mark Martin, CBN News.
And here with us now is David Beer, Associate Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute. David, welcome. So, on the surface, it looks like this troop deployment is a page out of the Trump administration's immigration playbook. How do you see it?
Well, we've seen troop deployments repeatedly under the Bush administration. We saw it under the Obama administration, the Trump administration. Really, every administration has sought to use the National Guard in this way to support the Border Patrol. And it's not surprising that the Biden administration would be turning to this playbook at this moment.
David, Republicans and Democrats both are coming out against the decision. New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez saying, quote, deploying military personnel only signals that migrants are a threat. It seems as though this current immigration crisis is becoming even more of a political minefield for this administration.
Yeah, absolutely. They're getting blasted from both sides all the time. No one's happy. And that's largely because of the chaos. No one wants the chaos. The one side wants a more orderly process to let people come into the country, and the other side wants a much more strict enforcement policy that would try to prevent people from coming in that way. So at the end of the day, the administration's trying to please everyone and ultimately pleasing no one with the status quo.
Yeah, Republicans are saying this is sort of an empty gesture that won't work. The situation on the border already very strained. If we see an anticipated migrant surge topping what they say could be 10,000 a day, do we have the capability to handle it?
We certainly do. You have to understand there's over 20,000 Border Patrol agents, as well as another 20,000 Customs and Border Protection agents at ports of entry who could be redeployed. This is a very large Department of Homeland Security who's responsible for this. We had 10,000 ICE agents available. So there are agents and there are resources available. It will be a straining time, no doubt. They have to put people somewhere to process them. That'll be the most difficult challenge, is finding a place to hold people and to process them while they go through their proceedings.
David, I got a two-part question for you. First of all, what would bipartisan comprehensive immigration reform look like today? And then secondly, would we be able to get it across the finish line, do you think?
No, there's not any conversation happening between the parties, and that's what's needed. You need to have both parties come together and work out their differences and find some common ground. Where are the areas where you agree? We want to have a secure border. We want to have some legal immigration. We have almost 10 million open jobs in this country. We should be able to find some way for people to come in legally in the right way, as opposed to letting them across the border illegally.
All right, David Beer with the Cato Institute. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your insights tonight. Great to see you.
Of course. Thanks.
All right, in economic news tonight, the Federal Reserve is hiking interest rates above 5% for the first time since 2007. The quarter-point increase may be the last hike before a long-awaited pause on rate increases.
Our focus remains squarely on our dual mandate to promote maximum employment and stable prices for the American people. Price stability is the responsibility of the Federal Reserve. Without price stability, the economy does not work for anyone. In particular, without price stability, we will not achieve a sustained period of strong labor market conditions that benefit all.
The 10th consecutive interest rate hike comes amid renewed fears that the Fed's ongoing effort to combat persistent inflation could push the U.S. into a recession.
And here with us now is Joel Griffith, Research Fellow at the Roe Institute at the Heritage Foundation. Joel, welcome. So Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said the goal of the 10 hikes that Jenna just mentioned was and still is to bring down inflation back to 2%. Joel, from where you sit, is that working, or is this just pushing us toward a recession?
No, the Federal Reserve has been an abject failure, particularly over the past few years. I watched the entire press conference today with the chair of the Federal Reserve, and it was downright laughable. One thing that came out of the Fed remarks today was this claim that our banking system is, quote, resilient, end quote. Well, if you look at the bank failures that have already happened this year, those bank failures in terms of the money involved actually surpassed the 2008 banking crisis. Our banking system is not resilient. And left unsaid today with the Fed was a complete lack of recognition that their mistakes actually caused the sky-high inflation of the past 2 years. Our central bank printed trillions of dollars to finance the spending that was demanded by both Democrats and Republicans in Congress, and that is why we are dealing with sky-high inflation rates. And the Federal Reserve attempts to mitigate that with these interest rate hikes, they actually have not gone far enough.
Yeah. Well, Joel, now they're signaling a long-awaited pause on interest rate increases. Your thought on that?
Well, if they pause right now, we're actually going to see a continuation of the high inflation. And that's because the Fed has printed the trillions of dollars. A lot of those dollars have found their ways into the banks. And when you deposit money in a bank, the bank lends out those dollars. The dollars multiply. And what the Fed has been trying to do is they've been trying to pay the banks higher interest to try to encourage the banks to basically loan that money back to the Fed instead of lending it out into the economy. Well, right now, those interest rates are around 5%. Inflation rate is still higher than 5%, meaning that real interest rates are still negative. So the Fed has not gone far enough. And if they pause now, expect inflation to get even worse.
So you're saying, first of all, Joel, I'm going to ask you if you can be a little bit more passionate. But what you're saying is if the Fed takes its foot off the pedal, do you think that rates could start to tick back up?
Oh, I think inflation rates will begin to increase back up. Because what the Fed is doing right now is the Federal Reserve pays banks to actually keep the reserves on hand at the Fed. Now, each bank can decide, do they want to lend out those dollars to businesses and consumers, or do they want to go ahead and just park that money in their own accounts at the Federal Reserve and receive those interest payments? A lot of banks have chosen, as of late, to go ahead and just simply leave their deposits, or a good part of them, on hand at the Fed rather than lend out those dollars. Now, if you see a situation with the Federal Reserve is only paying banks, say, 5% to keep the money on hand at the Federal Reserve, but yet we as consumers will pay the bank 6%, 7%, or 8% for a loan. Well, that means a lot of those dollars are going to end up unleashed into the economy, meaning that inflation is going to grow even more. You know, there's no easy way out of this. Higher interest rates, of course, are harmful to families. We feel it in higher mortgage payments and credit card payments, but inflation is a problem as well. The typical family is seeing around $7,000 less per year in real income right now relative to 2 years ago because of inflation. What we need is for the Fed to actually be honest with the public, admit that they made a mistake in printing these trillions of dollars, and point out that Congress has been overspending and Congress has been demanding that they print more money. We have to get our federal spending under control, and the Federal Reserve needs to stop enabling these big spending politicians to stay in these very troubling ways.
Joel Griffith with the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for coming on tonight, Joe.
All right, thank you.
Always appreciate his energy. Well, the free press coming under attack. Up next, putting the spotlight on American journalists held captive in some of the most volatile countries for freedom of the press. Welcome back. While Americans' trust in the media sits at historic lows, a new report highlights a disturbing trend in the rise in threats to the free press in a record number of countries.
On this World Press Freedom Day, the group Reporters Without Borders says that's due to authoritarian leaders growing bolder in their attempts to silence journalists. The most dangerous countries include Vietnam, China, and North Korea. Also on the list, Syria and Russia, where American journalists are currently being held captive.
CBN National Security Correspondent Caitlin Burke joins us now. Caitlin, a lot of recent examples here.
The imprisonment of journalist Evan Gershkovich and Austin Tice point out the danger members of the media can face for simply doing their job. Russian authorities arrested Gershkovich, a Wall Street Journal reporter, 5 weeks ago on espionage charges. In Tice's case, the freelance journalist and former Marine has been held hostage in Syria for nearly 11 years.
Say that in this moment, there was a clear way forward. We don't have that in this moment, but it's something that we're working every single day.
According to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the U.S. ambassador to Russia met with Evan Gershkovich about a week ago, reporting he's in strong spirits.
We're intensely engaged with the Russians to seek his freedom, to seek his immediate release.
As for Tice, this 43-second video from 2012 shows the last time he was seen alive. Speaking at the National Press Club this week, his mother, Deborah Tice, says she doesn't believe the U.S. is seriously negotiating for her son.
I find the State Department to be exceedingly, profoundly anti-Syria, anti-engagement with Syria, and really unwilling to move on that.
Blinken says that's not the case.
Often we're engaged in efforts to get people home that we can't talk about even with the families. What I can say is this. We're extensively engaged with regard to Austin, engaged with Syria, engaged with third countries, seeking to find a way to get him home, and we're not going to relent until we do.
President Biden honored both Tice and Gershkovich over the weekend.
Tonight, our message is this. Journalism is not a crime. Evan and Austin should be released immediately, along with every other American held hostage or wrongfully detained abroad.
While the report considers the United States a satisfactory environment for journalists, it's dropped 3 places in the ranking. And Pew Research finds 57% of journalists are concerned about possible restrictions on the press in the U.S. Those who've been in the business longer are more likely to be concerned. In a statement released today, President Biden called the press a pillar of democracy and said his administration would, quote, continue to support a free press. John, Jenna?
All right, Caitlin, thank you. And coming up, the fentanyl-related deaths on the rise, how the drug is infiltrating the black market and killing unsuspecting people.
Well, a sobering statistic tonight. U.S. fentanyl-related deaths more than tripled over 5 years. Back in 2016, for every 100,000 deaths, the drug was responsible for a little over 5 of them. But in a new report from the CDC, that number now skyrockets.
In 2021, fentanyl killed nearly 22 people per 100,000. And as medical reporter Lori Johnson explains, the powerful opioid and potential killer is found in many drugs on the market, often added secretly.
Drug overdose deaths have been steadily climbing the last 20 years, but nothing like the acceleration we've seen lately. The main culprit, fentanyl, often secretly added to other drugs, catching the user off guard.
It's really just in everything, in the drug market. It's kind of a scary time.
The Virginia Medical Examiner's Office says 3/4 of overdose deaths involved fentanyl, almost all accidental.
This whole drug overdose epidemic has changed, but it's increasing significantly in the last year. And I'm not sure if we're going to really see anything slow down in the near future.
A synthetic opioid, fentanyl, is 100 times more powerful than morphine, so potent that the equivalent of a couple grains of sand can kill.
It is cheaper than many other substances, so it can be added to stretch out. If somebody has a certain amount of cocaine, for instance, if they add fentanyl, they can increase the volume at a very low cost.
It's also added to pills like Xanax, oxycodone, and Molly.
How easy is it to spot fake pills that are bought on the street?
Almost impossible. What we call a pill press is what dealers are using to take the powdered substance and turn it back into a prescription-looking pill. Are incredibly sophisticated.
In addition to the fentanyl-laced street drugs, pandemic closures of rehab centers also contributed to the high number of overdoses as recovering addicts relapsed.
Then they were alone. And that isolation is the worst thing to happen for someone who struggles with substance abuse.
Some drug prevention organizations are taking action to stop future overdoses by giving known users two things: fentanyl test strips to detect the substance in other drugs, and Narcan, the opioid reversal spray. While users are also advised to use the buddy system, the #1 recommendation remains get treatment.
But we've seen a lot of people get better. Mostly, and I have to be honest with you, it's through the power of Christ. When they give their life to the Lord and they say, look, God, I'm surrendering my life to you. I call it submitting to the process.
He recommends the 12-step program, which involves believing God can break the chains of addiction. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
Thanks, Lori. You can dance, you can jive, you can buy a dancing king and have the time of your life. I almost want to sing. The royal merchandise flying off British shelves next on Faith Nation.
Finally tonight, preparations are in full swing for this weekend's coronation of King Charles III. Souvenirs marking the royal celebration are flying off the shelves.
And one of the most popular is a little dancing bobblehead king. People are rushing to get their hands on special edition memorabilia. The Dancing King is so far the bestseller, but shoppers are also picking up things like cups, pens, and booklets to mark the occasion.
Just wanted all this memorabilia. You know, I had to get one of these booklets because I don't think this is ever going to happen again in my lifetime. So it's fun being part of the history.
The coronation takes place at Westminster Abbey this Saturday morning, and you're a royal watcher, right?
Yes, she's right. This is a huge event. I'm putting together a story that's going to air Friday on the 700 Club and here on Faith Nation about the coronation, but specifically about King Charles' faith and what that'll look like in the ceremony.
I'm sure it'll be very interesting.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see it. Thanks for watching Faith Nation.
Have a great night.